Decades before Harriet Jacobs was born, leading Southerners such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had been convinced that slavery was nearing its end. Tobacco had exhausted the soil. The need for slave labor had diminished. That changed in 1803 when President Jefferson signed the Louisiana Purchase and doubled the size of the nation. 4 new states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, together known as the Deep South, joined the Union as slave states.
Thomas Jefferson, in negotiating the Louisiana Purchase, declared that he was going to create an empire for liberty. He was going to make an area in which American liberty would expand across the continent. Thomas Jefferson's empire for liberty turned out to be an empire for slavery. The 19th century, the years after the Louisiana Purchase, were the period of the greatest expansion of American slavery ever.
The new land was an ideal match for a new invention, the cotton gin.
The combination of the cotton gin and the Louisiana Purchase made the production of cotton unbelievably profitable. You know, the cotton gin increased the amount of cotton that a single slave could produce in a day by 50-fold. What it meant was that growing cotton was incredibly, incredibly profitable.
In 1808, just as cotton was creating an insatiable appetite for slave labor, Congress abolished the importation of slaves from Africa. Now an already vibrant domestic slave trade would flourish. In the Upper South, the sale of slaves became more profitable than growing tobacco.
Slaves vary wildly in value, from $50 to $2,000, depending on who they are, how old they are. But the valuable ones are very, very valuable.
The slave trade develops its own language. It's the language of big bucks. It's a language of wenches. Of course, this entire language is meant to separate black people from the common run of humanity. It's a language of dehumanization. It's a language of bestiality, to say that these people are, in fact, like animals.
Slave auctions became a common sight, even in the nation's capital.
I got $100 bid. Thank you, sir. Down 81 ought to have hands all over the crowd here. 140. 200. Who'll do that?
If a young woman was put on the auction block, one of the things that they wanted to make sure she could do was have children. They touched people's bodies, both men and women. But you can imagine that for a woman it was incredibly invasive. So they were not above taking her into a back room and examining her to see whether or not she was able to have children. Now, this is the 19th century, so one wonders what an ordinary slaveholder would be doing. But they, even on the auction block, they would feel a woman's breast to see whether or not she could suckle a child.
The specter of the auction block haunted the lives of enslaved people.
Slave mothers knew that this moment might come, and they anticipated it, and they did everything they could to prevent it. They lobbied with their masters. They tried to get sold with their children. But it was something that haunted them from the moment that their children were born, that they might lose them.
More than 1 million people would be sent to the Deep South. Nearly twice as many as were brought to America in all the years of the African slave trade. Many of the enslaved were compelled to march the entire distance. some as much as 1,000 miles. To one observer, the procession of chained slaves resembled nothing so much as a funeral march.
And it took everything they had to keep going. And we also need to remember that some people didn't make it. Some people were depressed, some people were suicidal, some people were vengeful and violent with each other or toward animals or toward children. There was a lot of loss. There was a lot of loss.